everybody, it's Clint, the Ivy League trucker. Today, for this segment, I'd like to tell you a story from this past June when I was making north-south runs between the Mid-Atlantic and North Carolina. And it was pretty warm for mid-June, even for that area, and the air conditioning had gone out in my truck earlier that week. And my dispatcher asked me, "Hey, you still want to take these loads and make these runs?" And I said, "Well, yeah, because 1, I don't get paid if I don't keep driving, and I want to get paid, and 2, I'm not a pussy." So he said, "Okay, some of the younger guys won't take the loads if there's no AC." And to get the AC fixed, it had to go in the shop, and that would take a little bit of time. So I accepted the load and headed out. On the way down, I stopped at a small independent truck stop, which is on US 301, which runs north-south east of DC and Baltimore. And I use that because it avoids I-95 through Washington, DC and Baltimore, which is always a mess no matter what time you do it. And there's no truck services. And it's a more relaxed way to go. It takes a little more time, but I enjoy it. So I pulled into this truck stop that I'd been to before, and I knew I was going to have to sleep with the windows open, running the little clip-on fan, and just trying to do my best. So it was warm, very warm, probably in the upper 80s and humid. And I went in and paid, and the guy I paid was this is an older truck stop that has kind of run down a bit and then been bought by an Indian family. I actually find that's a fairly common thing where they buy them and try to run them. So it was kind of beat up inside, but the Indian kid took my money and I paid the $20 and for parking overnight and went back to the truck. And as I'm walking back, I'm thinking, this is not going to be a great night. So I got settled in, walked around the truck a few times, had a smoke, tried to relax a little bit, and stripped out pretty much my skivvies and had the windows open and was running the fan. And I couldn't get to sleep. I mean, it was just too hot. I was tossing and turning. So I got up, I sat in the front seat, and this is the scene. I'm on the edge of this truck stop that just kind of backs into these woods. And in the distance, I can see over the top of the bridge, the moon, which is a full moon shining down on the James River. And I'm hearing all the frogs, all the different choruses and of 3 or 4 different types of frogs. And there's a little breeze stirring. And so I just lit up a backwoods, sat in the seat, and had a chance to think as I was trying to relax a little bit and get back to sleep. And I looked up at the full moon and I realized that, that same moon shines down on us all, no matter what our situation is, no matter where we're coming from. Anyone in that part of the world looking up would have seen in the clear sky the full moon. And I started listening to the frogs again, and I'm thinking, this is kind of cool. Definitely a situation where a lot of folks wouldn't feel maybe even safe, or a woman would probably not feel comfortable. There's about 7 or 8 trucks parked there, and this type of truck stop is just the more experienced truckers go to it, and it's a little off the beaten path. And I'm listening to the frogs and looking at the moon and realizing, you know what? Life, is not so bad. I'm working, making decent money. My wife loves me. She still loves me after all the troubles we've been through. I've decided to do this job, and this is something I've decided to do, to take this run. Even though it's a little bit uncomfortable and I'm not going to get a ton of sleep tonight, I'll get the run done. And once I get moving in the morning and get a few cups of coffee in me, it'll be fine. And I'll get down to North Carolina and unload down there and, head back. And the thing I'm thinking about is, 1, just common grace, the common grace of being healthy and being able to work and being able to move forward in life. And so that's one thing. 2, I'm thinking, this is kind of a hoot, just sitting there in my underwear in the front of a semi, smoking a backwoods, looking up at the moon, listening to frogs and thinking about nature and God's creation and stuff like that. And I'm just, thankful for that, but also kinda laughing at myself because this is a bit of a weird situation. So that was the night. I got about 3, maybe hours of sleep that night. About 6:30, I just woke up naturally and kinda got myself together. It was a little cooler in the early morning and went inside the truck stop, got a cup of coffee, came back out, and as I was walking back, there was a truck parked fairly close to me, and it was a truck which had a unique kind of trailer on it, which is a shorter trailer that's refrigerated, and this is a sort of truck that carries specialized refrigerated things. And there was a woman who stepped out of it, and she was walking a small dog and coming back toward me. And so I chatted her up a little bit, and she said, "It's me and my husband, we're semi-retired, and, he was a trucker, and we've bought this truck, and we do specialized medical drugs and things that need to be shipped fairly quickly in controlled environment, controlled refrigerated, and high value, high security. And so the runs are a little bit irregular, but they pay pretty well. And they combine that with living out of the truck and between having to do runs, they move around the country and see different parts of the country. And it's semi-retired, so they're able to make enough money, spend time together, and then do these runs along the way to help pay the bills. And I said, "Yeah, that's interesting." And, she climbed back up in the truck and little dog jumped up and they were gone. And I thought about that as I watched their truck drive away, of how that's kind of an interesting and unique way to make some part-time money for someone who had driving experience at the latter part of their lives. I It's not something that my old, you know, Ivy League educated office workers would have ever thought of, but it's certainly a reasonable way to make money, and they're very much in control of it, how much they do of it, how long they do of it, etcetera. And I thought, that's interesting. And as they drove away, I looked back at the truck stop and I thought about the owners of the truck stop, the Indian immigrants. If you looked on the online trucker reviews of the truck stop, they weren't that great. But I had to respect the owners. They took on something that needed work, this dilapidated truck stop. I'm sure they worked their butts off. I mean, you know, somebody's got to man that place 24/7. They had a small garage in the back. They're trying to make revenue off of parking, make revenue off some repairs, and run a small truck stop. They had a restaurant that looks like they were trying to fix up in there. And it was definitely a work in progress, but I had respect for that they've really taken this on and they're probably, first generation immigrants and want to work as hard as they can to make a better life for themselves and for, their children and the next generation. And it's a pretty common immigrant story, but it's not a world I used to think about very much. I didn't see it much and I didn't think about it much, but I do enjoy stopping there because, it's convenient. It's more experienced truckers, not the new guys. It's not crowded and it works. So the assignment for today is to try to find somebody who has a very different background than you and ask them, how they're doing what they're doing, what their plans are, and see if that generates some kind of conversation. You might talk to some of the service providers you see. You might talk to just somebody you run into in the local convenience store or whatever. But slow down a minute and try to engage somebody in conversation and see where it goes. You never know. You might learn something. Hey, everybody. This is Clint with the Ivy League Trucker. and I'm recording this in early January 2026. So Happy New Year to everybody. This segment I'm going to call Tashi, meeting someone from some other place. I first met Tashi in March of 21 when I was starting out in some initial training with Schneider in bulk, which is liquid bulk carrying out in Western PA. This is at the beginning of my trucking training. Tashi is from Tibet. He's about 45 to 50 years old, and he immigrated from Tibet, I guess, probably about 9 years ago at this point. And he come over to the U.S. and was living in Astoria, Queens, in New York City, like a lot of immigrants start in New York City. He initially drove for Uber, and this was the period when Uber was building market share, so they were actually paying the drivers pretty well. But as they grew and they eventually started monetizing and becoming profitable, they started paying the drivers less and less. Eventually, he couldn't really make enough money doing Uber, and that's when he decided to go to trucking school. And once he completed his initial trucking training, we ended up meeting out in Western PA there with some initial training. Now, Tashi's family, they fled from Tibet to India when he was young. No love lost for the Chinese, as the Chinese had uh, suppressed Tibetan culture and controlled that area since the 1950s. And so later, Tashi grew up in India and was in the Indian Army. He's actually been in 5 firefights in the mountains uh, on the India-Chinese border in the Himalayas, so he's had an interesting past there. He was married in India and divorced and had a daughter who is currently, I think, in her 20s, still living in India. He had remarried a Tibetan woman, and they moved to the States, and they had at that time, about a 6-year-old daughter. And his wife worked at a pretty good hotel in Manhattan with some benefits, which allowed him the flexibility of being a trucker. And they still lived in Queens. Like most Tibetans, he was small of stature and had a sunny disposition. We hit it off right away because most of the other folks in the class were a good bit younger than us. One day we were out in the yard learning how to do the pumps and the hoses and all that. And I looked over, and there he was in the lotus position, sitting all by himself with his middle fingers just touching the ground. And I went over and I said, "Tosh, what are you doing?" His eyes were closed. And he said he was meditating and trying to connect with the energy from the earth. And he talked a little bit about that. And I thought that was pretty different and fascinating. Uh, as things went on, we ended up spending a couple of weeks together on the road with our initial on the road training with a trainer driver. We were delivering loads and being taught by him how to do that. I started asking him more questions just about his background. I asked him, as an immigrant, what was his, favorite thing about America or the best thing about America. And he said the best thing about America was the Constitution and the separation of powers. I was a little surprised by that. I usually would think he would talk about opportunity or something like that, but he talked about the Constitution and civil liberties and all of that. And mind you, this is a man whose family had experienced direct oppression by the Chinese in Tibet. So he had a real appreciation for our civil liberties and rule of law in the States. He said that once he got a little more established and made a little more money, he'd like to go out to Montana or North Dakota and buy land and have a house and live out there. That would work for him since truck drivers can live pretty much anywhere. And he talked about bringing his ailing mother over from Tibet so she could get better health care. And a little bit later on, he did do that. They're living together with his wife and daughter and his mother and getting health care in New York City. It just goes to show, he's really a kind and generous guy and had a lot of good perspective. It was so thankful that he was here in the States. So one of those days as we were taking a break in the truck, and we were playing songs to each other on Spotify. He said his favorite American song was Country Roads by John Denver. And let me tell you, there's nothing quite like sitting in a semi truck. I guess it was in South Carolina with a Tibetan guy who puts on his cowboy hat, which he's so happy to have, and he sings "Country Roads" to you in his Tibetan accent. I guess only in America, and it shows you the real bountiful opportunities here and how many immigrants come here and are thankful for that. So, he's smart, he's kind, he's generous, he works hard, and he's looking forward to the future for his daughter. I think last time we talked on the phone, she was in second grade and, of course, doing very well in school. Another time we had ended up meeting perchance out on the road and had a little time. So he took me over to an Indian restaurant. I think it was in North Carolina, and talked to the owner. It was kind of mid afternoon, nobody was around, and the owner cooked up some Indian fare that Tashi said the Americans don't usually get. And after lunch, eating that, um, and listening to him talk in, I guess, Hindi to the Indian guy, we did the lotus position right there on the floor in the restaurant and meditated a little bit, and that was fun. So I've kept up with Tosh over the years, and we encourage each other while we're on the road. We just call and catch up and see what's going on. Since then, he bought a house over in New Jersey, moved over to North Jersey, and was fixing that up, I think near Paramus, just working on that. So he's pretty smart with money, and he's doing well. One of the times I spoke with him more recently, he talked about how he had actually made a bid on a big farm in, I think it was South Dakota, a kind of a revenue producing farm that someone was aging out of and was looking to sell. And he was very close to buying it, but his wife wasn't comfortable at the last minute. But I'm pretty sure at some point Tashi will buy some land out in the central part of the country or the Dakotas or somewhere and fulfill his dream of becoming a landowning farmer in the United States. So again, Tosh is a guy who I never would have met in my old life. I really appreciate him and his story and his attitude. The assignment out of this one is to find someone with an immigrant background, first generation, second generation immigrant who can have some story for you as to how they got here and how they appreciate America. I'm not being political here at all. I think there's a lot of folks like this around, and it's been really great for me to get to know them and to get to know their stories. So, wishing a little of that experience for you. Until next time, it's Clint, the Ivy League trucker. Shiny side up.